Welcome back, everybody. Chapters 15 and 16. We're getting close to the end of this class. Talking today about audiovisual requirements. Now, we touched on this just a little bit in some of our previous lectures. AV is probably one of the most, I think, overlooked elements in a meeting. And I say that because I think in a lot of times, a lot of cases, clients think you can just show up and go. And whether that they assume that you have in-house audio within, say, a meeting space, or the meeting space isn't big enough that you would need it, it can be overlooked. And to be quite honest, the AV will make or break a good meeting or a good event. And there are fantastic AV companies here in town. The probably one that's most well known. I pronounce it Marquise. I know others have pronounced it Marquise. A little bit different emphasis on a different syllabus. But again, one of the key elements, especially when you get into your larger events, right? How things are lit. What is the sound system like for a room with 500 people? What kind of screens do I need? Because the person in the back of that meeting room does not have the same view as the person who is up front. So once again, what does that look like? So again, what's needed, right? And so those kind of conversations, again, the CSM's going to sit down with the client and say, typically, what is your budget? And it's amazing sometimes that companies do not budget correctly for the AV element. And like I said before, depending upon the room you're in, depending upon the event you're having, it will make or break the event. If I can't hear a lecture and you brought in a $100,000 speaker, well, what good did it do? You got to make sure that those things are in place. So it's vital that you, as a CSM, understand what the capabilities of the AV equipment, if your hotel owns it, what their capabilities are, or if you have a third party in house, which many of the hotels in downtown, I think the Marriott just went a few years back to having their own in house, but most of the other hotels downtown use Marquees or some sort of company like that, and so they pretty much have access to just about everything you could want. There are third parties out there who can take it to a different level, where whether it's the size of the TVs or the LEDs or how many looms they have, the kind of specialty lighting where, again, is it various colors? Is it spotlight? Is it an entire backdrop, right? And so those get into a much larger area, and a lot of times you wouldn't sell that as an individual per se. You'd bring a rep of theirs in to say, okay, walk us through this, because number one, you're getting into a higher price for certain uh, type of audiovisual experience. But number two, being an expert in all of that on top of your hotel typically is not expected of a convention services manager. So again, things to talk about, basic things you're going to need to understand. And again, we've kind of touched on this. When you're sitting in a meeting room, again, what does the AV, what capabilities does the AV have, right? Do two speakers, is that enough for a room that's under 5,000 square feet? If it's rectangular, do you need to have four, two in the middle, two on the outside? If it's elongated, do you need to have two in the front and two about halfway? Same thing with screens, right? If the room's a smaller room, say under 1,000 square feet, maybe one screen up at the front will do it. However, a room like our Grand Hall at Union Station, which was, I think, 10,000 square feet, and had lighting coming in from all the stained glass that we had, well, now you not only did you need one ginormous screen with an incredibly powerful camera to offset some of the lighting, you probably had to have one or two on the way back, because if I'm in the back of the room, no matter how big that screen is, I probably can't read it. So again, knowing the room, knowing what the capabilities of your AV are, these are all components that your client is going to expect you to understand and be able to share with them what is the best setup, right? And what are the needs. And so this is where it comes into that trust that we kind of talked about in the sales side, right? Very easy to sell somebody something they don't know. Oh yeah, in this room you've got to have multiple screens. In this room you've got to have an LED projector. Well, that you can get away with that once, and the client comes in and goes, "We didn't need all this stuff. If we just needed, this one thing." They're going to understand that. On the same side too, you may have to work with the client to say, "Look, I know you have a budget. I know you want to be conscious of the money you spend, but again, if you don't set it up like this, then it's my experience that the quality of your meeting is going to drop. If you're okay with that, that's your call. but I owe it to you to say this is what it takes to put on a class A type meeting. So that's your kind of your responsibility to CSM. Some clients will say, nope, can't do it, not going with it. We'll take a step down, if you will. Others will say, I appreciate that. This is important to us. We'll spend the extra $2,000. And so that's again, the book will go into a greater detail on some of the different elements of audiovisual and what you're looking for. The one thing I always wanted to point out to clients were costs that we kind of assume they knew, but they may not have. And again, we've talked about those hidden costs before. If you're setting up a podium with with multiple speakers, and you're going to have so you have a sound system involved, but you're not only having someone speak, right? So I've got a lavalier on, or maybe I've got a handheld mic, but then we're also going to play sound from our computer. Well, what a lot of people don't know is you've got to have a mixing board to pull that off, because now you're changing the source of where your noise is coming from. That then usually takes a technician. So now you just added two more elements. You've got to ask those questions, right? So we talk about presentations. You've got to ask who's speaking, where are they speaking, are they a walker, do they stand still, are you going to bring in secondary sound elements? Again, those questions, and that's again why that CSM is so vitally important when it comes to being detail oriented. You want to know those things now, not the day of, not the day before, when all of a sudden you're telling the client, hey, look, I didn't understand this is what you were doing. That's an additional, $500. No client likes to hear that, right? So that's when we go back. We need to make sure we're on top of things. We're making sure we're sharing with our client what we know that setup entails, and just to make sure they know it as well. So that's AV. That's chapter 15. And let me pull up 16 here real quick. Uh, Sorry, everybody. There we go. So this one's a little bit unique. This is kind of the outliers, right? So admission systems and other services. So on an admission services, or sorry, on the admission side of things, this is definitely something you're going to see as you get into either a larger hotel, or you're working for a convention center, or perhaps you are the third party planner. When you get into it in an admissions type, where it's convention registration. So let me back up. Convention registration, obviously usually a much, much larger component, typically not handled by a hotel, but needs to be known, because a lot of times there's an element that will tie into our reservation system. So again, there are a number of platforms you'll be able to use, number of different software out there. This is probably more in the line of a planner. A convention registration might have some assistance from the convention center itself if they had a platform they used. It kind of just depends on which element they're going to use. What would you use the registration for? Could be everything from meals to maybe breakout rooms are limited. So instead of having just anybody can come in, you've got to register in advance, because I know this room only holds 100 people, so it's the first 100 that get to come in. Your general sessions obviously are going to be wide open. You'll have enough room for everybody. Meals, maybe they've got three different areas, and so this area is going to have this guest speaker, that area has that guest speaker. Once again, I've got to register so I know to provide 200 meals here, 300 meals here, and 400 meals over here. Those are the kind of things you would use this registration system for. When it comes to the other outlying things, I could go on for days, right? Everything from concerns with security. Are you doing special, events for children or spouses? What does the exhibit area look like, right? And again, a lot of times you're going to hand that off to a third party that helps set that up, but not always. A hotel might say, you know what, we have a third party that will help us set up the booth, but I, as a CSM, am going to be responsible for making sure booths are set up in a certain way. I'm assigning the booths. Typically, you wouldn't. Typically, the planner would most likely assign the booth, only because my guess would be, whether it was a pecking order where first person got the best pick, could be that different ones cost different amounts, or you can pay for a better one. So a lot of times you'll be given what who's going to be where, but then of course you've got to go mark them, all that kind of good stuff. So there's a ton of different things depending upon where you're at. Are you bringing golf into play? So again, other offsites that you're doing. We just worked with ERMIA, which is University Risk and Insurance Managers. They came up to Butler, and I actually put on a 4-hour, 3-hour, 4-hour specialty in insurance, if you will. We had one of our alums speak about captive. We had one of our professors speak about our undergrad and our grad program. And then we had an alum of our master's program who also was a professor do a risk analysis at Hinkle Fieldhouse. So, you know, that, and I had to work with a planner for that particular conference to get all of that worked out. So again, you might be tied into that because the bus is coming to your hotel. You got to bus them out and bus them back in again. So there's just all kinds of various elements. The book does a fantastic job of touching on a few of some of the maybe the more well-known things, but understand that you know, most planners want to they want to set themselves apart by their creativity and by making an event unique. They're going to want to tap into what you know. They're also going to try to bring certain things to the table that sets this meeting aside from something else. So keep that in mind. So this was a quick one. The last two lectures pretty much should be. Again, good job so far. We got one more set of lectures. I'll get those recorded here in a minute, and you guys will have the last four and be ready to go. Thanks.